Trump's Republican Party spirals into chaos. Bernie Sanders exposes brutal Medicare cuts to fund billionaire tax breaks. Trump's defense chief erases LGBTQ heroes. Kate Shaw dismantles Josh Hawley's court spin. And shocking evidence emerges of Trump officials cooking economic data. The GOP's cruelty, corruption, and collapse are fully on display. Bernie Sanders exposes GOP's brutal plan. Gut Medicare, reward billionaires, and punish millions of working-class Americans.
Republicans have backed themselves into a political corner with their big, beautiful bill. In order to pay for their massive tax cuts for the wealthy and large corporations, they have to cut Medicaid, or something else. But they've chosen to cut Medicaid. Cutting Medicaid is very unpopular, especially among the coalition of voters that now make up Donald Trump's base. And the way they're trying to wriggle out of this inconvenient truth is either to just lie about it, claim they're not cutting benefits, or in the case of Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, to admit they don't care if people are hurt. Well, we're all going to die, she says. Well, today we got an estimate from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, which says nearly 11 million people could lose their health insurance under this plan. That is roughly the population of the state of Georgia. Republicans can say whatever they want about the bill, and they will, but that's the reality they're facing. Senator Bernie Sanders, an independent of Vermont, the ranking member of the Health Committee, and he joins me now. Senator, it's good to have you on.
Thank you.
Your colleagues, your Republican colleagues, to the extent they're making an argument on this, but particularly in the House, I would say no one's going to lose. Like, basically, I think the argument is only immigrants or people that are kind of lazy and just don't want to work are going to be ones cut off of benefits, and you shouldn't worry about that.
Well, you should worry about it. The truth is, Chris, when they talk about a quote-unquote work requirement, understand that every year 20 million people in this country lose their jobs or change jobs and so forth. And for all of those people, many of them low-wage workers who are dependent upon Medicaid, they're going to have to fill out a dozen different forms. They're not going to do it. So the plan is to intentionally drive people, that is the goal, to drive people off of Medicaid so that they can save substantial sums of money, some $700 billion, and then transfer that to the wealthiest people in this country through massive tax breaks for the rich and very large corporations. And I should mention, as I think everybody knows, this comes on top of the fact that our current healthcare system is broken, it is dysfunctional. We got 85 million people already who are uninsured or underinsured. Many of them are working. This will only make a terrible situation even worse. And by the way, if I can say, it's not just individuals who are going to lose their health insurance. Medicaid pays about 60% of nursing home costs, which means that nursing homes that are struggling right now are going to suffer. Hospitals are going to suffer. It's going to have a massive impact on an already broken healthcare system.
We should also know one of the things in the CBO report, there's a bunch of things that Democrats did when they were in power, particularly in the American Rescue Plan, to shore up Obamacare and get more people in. In fact, the number that were insured grew every year under Biden, and that was because of policy mechanisms, which
I know about that. I helped write that bill.
Yes, exactly. Well, I'm explaining for the viewer, not for you. But point being that should those expire, which they're set to, and I don't think they're going to re-up, that's another 5 million people. Like, there's other attacks on the system they're doing that are getting less attention, but that's another 5 million people, according to that CBO report today.
It's absolutely. It is beyond. It's totally unconscionable. And to do that in order to give massive tax breaks to people today on the top who have never, ever had it so good is beyond cruel. It is really almost unspeakable. But you know what, Chris? I mean, this whole issue touches on what Trumpism is really about. If you think about it, what Trumpism is about, it's, when he goes to Saudi Arabia and he loves this guy MBS, who is a murderer, killed a Washington Post journalist, but he's rich, and you can make a deal with him. Well, what this is all about is that if you're rich in America and you can make campaign contributions, you are entitled to massive tax rates because you're superhuman beings. But if you're a poor working stiff going out there, working in McDonald's, you're working in a factory, You're struggling to put food on the table. Hey, you are entitled to nothing. We're going to cut not only health care in this bill, massive cuts in nutrition for kids, for elderly people, massive cuts in education, making it harder for kids to be able to attend college. That is what Trumpism is about, for the superior people, the Elon Musks of the world, the people who are successful. We're going to make them more successful. You're a working stiff. You're entitled to nothing. And the other interesting element about this whole thing is, Elon Musk came out against it. See, he was offended that this is going to raise the national debt, and he wants more cuts.
Yes.
This is the richest guy on earth, wants more cuts in nutrition programs for hungry kids, in healthcare, in education. And what he is saying, which takes you to another outrage in the American system, is obviously he helps fund the Republican Party. So he said, if you don't go, in so many words, you don't go along with me, you know what, we're going to get rid of you. You're out of office. So much for democracy in the Republican Party.
Do you think, I'm just asking your former colleague, Senator Jon Tester, this, I mean, there are people who think basically doesn't cut enough, right? It doesn't screw people enough on Medicaid or SNAP, and are making noises about voting against them. How seriously do you take those noises from someone like Ron Johnson?
I think Ron is a serious guy. He doesn't look. Many of these people barely believe in government. I mean, you think I'm exaggerating?
No.
Government is an impediment to billionaires being able to do what they want. If they want to build a factory and pollute a river or a lake, hey, what is the problem? That's their right to do. They want to buy the American political system. Hey, that's their right. They're successful. So people like Johnson, believe very strongly that national, with Musk, that they want to bring down the national debt. They're certainly not going to go after the tax breaks for the rich. By the way, $150 billion more for the military, which has not been able to complete a successful audit. They're not going to go after that. What does it mean? It means they'll continue their tax against the working class.
Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, thanks for making some time for us tonight.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Republicans push massive Medicare cuts to fund tax breaks for billionaires, risking health care for 11 million Americans. Senator Bernie Sanders slams the plan as cruel and unconscionable, highlighting its devastating impact on low-wage workers, nursing homes, and education. Meanwhile, GOP donors like Elon Musk demand even deeper cuts, fueling party infighting. Trump's defense chief erases Harvey Milk's legacy, igniting outrage over GOP's war on LGBTQ and civil rights heroes.
Harvey Milk, arguably the best known as the first openly gay politician in the state of California, civil rights hero. But prior to that, he spent nearly 4 years in the Navy Reserve. He enlisted in 1951. That was during the Korean War. Milk was deemed, quote, outstanding, very good officer material by his superiors. A year later, in 1952, he's made a Navy Reserve officer. During the war, Milk saw action, spending 2 years as an operations officer on rescue submarines. He was a diver. But in 1954, Milk was outed as gay. When questioned by Navy officials, he admitted that he engaged in, quote, homosexual activities while enlisted and was presented with two options: resign with an other than honorable discharge, foregoing his military benefits that he had earned, or be court-martialed. Milk chose to resign. He spent the following decade working various jobs in New York City before he became a demonstrator against the Vietnam War. In the early 1970s, Milk moved to San Francisco. He became involved in local politics. He was elected to the City Board of Supervisors in 1977 before his tragic assassination by a fellow Board of Supervisors member the following year. In 2012, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors wrote to the Navy asking they name a ship in honor of Harvey Milk, and 4 years later, the Navy agreed to make it happen. In 2021, a U.S. Navy fleet oiler was named after Milk in a tribute to his honorable service and his status as an LGBTQ icon.
The Secretary of the Navy needed to be here today, not just to amend the wrongs of the past, but to give inspiration to all our LGBTQ community leaders who serve in the Navy in uniform today and in the civilian workforce as well, too, and to tell them that we're committed to them in the future.
Our new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is now going in a different direction. This week, at the start of Pride Month, he took the very rare step, this doesn't happen hardly ever I've covered, of ordering the Navy to rename the U.S. naval ship Harvey Milk, quote, to align with President Donald Trump and the Secretary of Defense's objectives to reestablish the warrior culture. John Lovett's former speechwriter for President Barack Obama, now the host of the Love It or Leave It podcast and co-host of Pod Save America, and he joins me now. John, I got to say, at some level, this is a kind of form of performative trolling by the Secretary of Defense, but I'm like genuinely outraged by it. I think it's like profoundly like messed up.
Yeah, well, here's the good news. You can remove Harvey Milk's name from that vessel, but that ship will still be bow to stern filled with seamen.
Thank you. Thank you for that line,
No,
John.
You're welcome. To make a serious point about it, remember when we talked about the renaming of military facilities and bases that were named after Confederates, and why naming our institutions after people that rebelled against this country and were traitors to it might be a problem? That was a kind of cancel culture. That was wrong. That was erasing our history. But now you want to remove, by the way, not just Harvey Milk's name. There's also they're also considering removing Medgar Evers' name, Harriet Tubman's name, both people who served in the military. Harriet Tubman, a spy and a scout during the Civil War. Medgar Evers served in the Army during World War II. It's they love cancel culture. They're huge fans of cancel culture. They just want to cancel the people they don't like.
Yeah, I thought that thing, too, about the warrior culture was such a reveal about how they conceive of it. Like, Milk they have ordered. These are the other ones reporting indicates per CBS that they're considering. I mean, Harriet Tubman, it's like, say whatever you want about Harriet Tubman. She was a warrior. I mean, as much as of a warrior as just about any human in American history was Harriet Tubman. Like, it's such a tell about what they mean by that word that they're so obsessed with using as their kind of rhetorical cover.
Yeah, I mean, we'd all, like, the Combahee River Raid, just to name one moment in American history, just an awe-inspiring act of, like, bravery, running a military operation. Of course we should have ships named after Harriet Tubman. Like, of course Harriet Tubman should be on our money. That is heroism. But, of course, like, look, this is in some sense not a big deal, right? The names on the side of a ship are not a big deal. But when someone is honored and they are gay or they're black or they're Hispanic, they comb through the record. They start to suspect that maybe something else is afoot. Maybe they really didn't deserve it. But that's also, by the way, what they do. If a plane crashes, their first thought is, oh, I wonder if a black person was at the radar, right? I wonder if a woman was at the controls, because then it's DEI, right? Then it's not the best person. And so it is this assumption that if someone is honored, it doesn't look exactly like what they expect from a 1950s movie, it's suspect. It's worth questioning.
You are about to do an event that caught my eye because I think it's really important to sort of raise awareness for one of the individuals who has been consigned to, indefinite detention in a foreign gulag, Andre Romero. He is one of the folks in that CCOT facility in El Salvador. He himself is Venezuelan. He's an out gay man who works as a hairdresser, makeup artist, I believe, in Venezuela. Tell me a little bit about this event, because we've got some news today about a judge ruling about cases like Andre's.
Yes, so we are doing a fundraiser for Andre. It is the Bulwark, which is former Republicans from the right and crooked coming together from the left to raise a bunch of money at a pretty big gay pride show. It's a serious cause, but it's going to be a fun show because we can't just move on from this. He's still down there. Right? The media moves on. The story moves on to the next horror, the next outrage, a boat renaming a military parade. Meanwhile, this is a person who has been disappeared by the U.S. government to a foreign hellhole. Kristi Noem is asked just to provide proof of life to his mother as a mother. Won't do it. It is despicable. It's monstrous. And we have to do everything we can to keep the focus on this. It is great that there was a ruling today that their rights were violated, Andres and everyone else who has disappeared without so much as a hearing. But we can't. The second we just move on is the second this becomes something that we accept. So we're doing this event. We'll be at outside the Supreme Court at 5 o'clock in D.C. On Friday. The live show and fundraiser will be the Lincoln Center at Lincoln Theater at 8 p.m. on Friday night. It's World Pride. And by the way, you want to talk about warriors. Do you understand how much stamina it takes these gay guys to get through 48 hours of World Pride?
Shed a tear for our strongest warriors. I should say that Judge Boasberg decision today, that's a federal district judge basically starting to certify a class saying that Andre Romero, along with 200 plus other individuals, had their habeas rights violated. The government has to give them an opportunity for redress. But to your point, Kilmar Garcia, who's sort of in a different category because the government made a mistake, but Andre Romero and so many others are still down there without redress as of now. I'm glad that you guys are keeping a spotlight on this. John Levitt, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
The Navy removes Harvey Milk's name from a ship under Trump's defense secretary, sparking backlash over GOP attacks on LGBTQ and black icons like Harriet Tubman and Medgar Evers. Critics call it performative cancel culture, revealing the right's selective targeting of minority heroes while masking bigotry behind warrior culture rhetoric. Professor Kate Shaw brilliantly dismantles Josh Hawley's defense of Trump, exposing simple truth behind his endless court losses.
There was a fun moment in the United States Senate yesterday I'd love to share with you, mostly because it features the amazing constitutional law professor / podcast host / New York Times contributor Kate Shaw, who's also my wife. And it also features Missouri Senator Josh Hawley, who is amazing in his own way, I guess. Kate was a minority party witness in the Senate Judiciary Committee. The Democrats on the committee had called her and had an exchange with Hawley, who has been going to ridiculous lengths to defend the lawlessness of boss Trump and explain why he keeps losing in courts day after day after day. Hawley had printed out a big gotcha chart, which he seemed to think proved that Donald Trump is the victim of a vast network of biased judges from across the ideological spectrum. Professor Shaw suggested there might be a more simple explanation.
What's the principle of when an injunction binding non-parties, which was never done in this country before the 1960s? And let's see the chart, the Trump chart, which was done really only once Trump came into office for the first time. You don't think this is a little bit anomalous? You don't think that's a little bit strange?
A very plausible explanation, Senator, you have to consider is that he is engaged in much more lawless activity than other presidents, right?
You don't think
you must
this was never
possibility.
used before the 1960s, and suddenly Democrat judges decide we love the nationwide injunction, and then when Biden comes to office, no, actually.
It's Republican appointees as well, Senator, and the 1960s is where some scholars locate the beginning of this.
Can you identify one before then?
Mila Sohoni, who's another scholar of universal injunction, suggests 1913 is actually the first. There were others in the 20s.
The Republic endured for 150 years before there was a nationwide injunction.
Well, the federal government was doing a lot less until 100 years ago. So there's many things that have changed in the last 100 or the last 50 years.
So long as it is a Democrat president in office, then we should have no nationwide injunctions. If it's a Republican president, then this is absolutely fine, warranted, and called for. How can our system of law survive on those principles, Professor?
I think a system in which there are no meaningful constraints on the president is a very dangerous system.
It was a little hard to hear there at the end, but Professor Shaw said, I think a system in which there are no constraints on the president is a very dangerous system. So yeah, maybe the reason Donald Trump is getting blocked in the courts more than other presidents, that big part of the bar chart, is because he's finding himself in court more than other presidents because of what he's doing. And maybe not because nearly every federal judge appointed by both parties, including by Trump himself, suddenly became insanely anti-Trump. To quote the witness, a very plausible explanation you have to consider is that he is engaged in much more lawless activities than other presidents.
In a Senate clash, Professor Kate Shaw counters Senator Josh Hawley's claims that biased judges target Trump. Shaw argues Trump faces more legal blocks simply because he engages in more lawless actions than previous presidents. Her sharp testimony exposes GOP's twisted logic defending Trump's growing list of court defeats. Trump officials manipulate economic data while dismantling safeguards, but markets and real-world consequences are exposing the truth.
From the earliest moments of this second Trump administration, one commonly held fear, one I've had myself, was that the Trump White House could go after the independence and integrity of government economic statistics that the U.S. and the global economy depend on. Trump and his allies are obsessed with bending reality to their party line. And now, 4 months into his second term, we're starting to see from the Trump administration something that looks a lot like they might be starting to cook the books. Here's the example. Trump officials delayed a report on agricultural trade because they did not like what it said about the growing deficit. Economists are also now raising questions about the accuracy of government inflation data after the Labor Department warned that staffing shortages have impeded their work. And this is happening at a time when Trump Republicans are about to do a bunch of stuff, from blowing up deficits to slapping on more tariffs, that is likely to make some of the economic statistics that we're looking at worse. And so they're going to have an incentive to do what they can to hide the truth of the damage they are causing. Betsy Stevenson previously served as chief economist at the Department of Labor. She's now a professor of economics at the University of Michigan, and she joins me now. That reporting on agriculture was USDA, which does some of the statistics. The big repository that we kind of depend on is run out of the Department of Labor, where you worked, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I wonder if you could start by just talking about how the integrity and independence of that traditionally has been preserved.
Well, the number one way it's been preserved is data is handled almost entirely by career civil servants who come from all different political parties and are not loyal to a party, but loyal to their job and the American people of getting the data right. If you think about the Bureau of Labor Statistics, traditionally, it did not have really any political appointees except for the commissioner. And even the commissioner sometimes came up through the ranks of civil servants. So the civil servants, I actually wrote a piece, an opinion piece during the first Trump administration that said it would really be impossible to cook the books, because how would you convince all of those civil servants to turn a blind eye and not, scream and yell about it? I don't know how you would do it. But now I have seen what's going on in this Trump administration, and one of the things they're doing is getting rid of a lot of the civil servants and making the ones who are there so afraid for their jobs, their livelihood, their futures, that they're starting to change the power dynamics.
Yeah, and in the case that we have documented here of a USDA report that shows a widening trade deficit in the sort of aftermath of some of these tariffs, you have a political appointee, you have civil servants generating the data, and the political appointee coming in and being like, I don't like this, ultimately holding it, right? But it's that kind of interference that would be the mechanism by which you would have some sort of manipulation or book cooking.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about, and we'll come back to the labor data, it's going to be employment data released this Friday. The Secretary of Labor was not told that information until 30 minutes before the report was to be released, and reporters were already in a lockup having access to the data when the Secretary of Labor learned about it. The president's advisors at CEA learned about it the night before, and they historically wouldn't even tell the president that data until the president was absolutely done for the day. I remember having to wait around sometimes until late in the evening because the president had an event that night, and he couldn't be told the data that was going to come out the next morning until he was completely getting ready to go upstairs and go to bed, because we didn't want there to be any kind of ability to leak or accidentally say something. So it's always been treated that we need to preserve the integrity of the data, because that's been really successful for the United States. It allows people to have confidence and to have certainty that we all share information. And that we all know what's going on. I'm as informed as you are, and there's nobody that has some information that you don't have. And that when we start to get that kind of asymmetry in information and uncertainty, then like the whole game changes, because people are making bets based on what they think rather than all of us having the exact same information. And so that brings us to the second problem, which is not a cheating problem like a data, the books being cooked, but just defunding data collection. So the data is so noisy, it's meaningless. And that's been the complaint about the inflation data, is they've cut the budget, they've fired people, they've gotten rid of people, that it's not clear we're going to get very good data. I don't know that that means we're going to see inflation numbers that are too low. It could be that they're too high. They're just going to be less, the signal is going to be smaller and the noise is going to be greater.
Yeah, and I want to ask, because there are incentives for every administration to want the data to look a certain way, right? You want it to paint a rosy picture of what you're doing. The data is the data. It's collected as a measurement of the world, right? You're measuring the world. It's not just spin. And right now we're about to have a situation in which, if they pass this bill, if you start to see big deficits, like even bigger deficits, like there's going to be pressure on different parts of the system, depending on what they do with tariffs. And I wanted to get your response to something Jamie Dimon said about the bond market. There's been some worry about the bond market, sort of back and forth, in terms of the borrowing costs of the American government and expectations of its stability, essentially. Here's what Jamie Dimon had to say, which I thought was interesting, and it sort of speaks to this idea of like reality is going to win in the end, whatever you say about the data. Here's what he had to say.
You are going to see a crack in the bond market, okay? It is going to happen. I just don't know if it's going to be a crisis in 6 months or 6 years.
To say, look, it's not going to be that big a deal. It'll be scary for some people. But I wonder what you think about this idea of everything the Trump administration is doing, putting sort of real pressure on the bond market and things that might do to interest rates in the bond market.
Let's just start with something simple, which is, can you hide the truth from the American people by just masking the data? No, you can't, because real lives are going to start to be affected, and you can't hide it forever. You can definitely do a better job of spinning stories about where the problems are coming from when there's no data making it clear to everybody. When it comes to the bond market, look, the thing is, it's a market. We're going to be selling debt. We need somebody to say, yeah, I want to hold this debt that the American government owes me, because, I want to save for my future. I want to save for retirement. And I trust that the American government's going to pay me back. So what is Jamie Dimon saying when he says there's going to be a crack? He's saying the government's going to go out there and say, we need to borrow money. So we're selling all these treasury bills. Who wants to buy? And if not enough people raise their hand and say, I do, then we've got interest rates that are soaring well beyond anything that the Fed can control.
Yeah, and those interest rates, again, one of those things where you can spin it however you want, but the reality is going to out in the end, I think. Betsy Stevenson, thanks for your time.
Amid soaring deficits and political spin, Trump's administration faces accusations of altering or delaying economic data to hide financial instability. Experts warn that civil servant purges and data manipulation threaten public trust. Yet, bond markets and rising interest rates signal that reality will eventually overpower the administration's distorted narrative. From gutting Medicare to erasing LGBTQ heroes, defending Trump's lawlessness, and manipulating economic data, the GOP's agenda reveals a pattern of cruelty, corruption, and authoritarian impulse. But as legal, social, and financial pressures mount, reality is cracking their false narratives, and America watches this dangerous unraveling unfold.